Good afternoon. I'm Interim Chancellor Ralph Hexter. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the third event in the 2016-17 season of the Chancellor's Colloquium Distinguished Speakers Series. Each year, the Chancellor's Colloquium brings to our campus about a half dozen highly distinguished figures drawn from diverse scholarly, professional, or creative fields. This series provides our audiences with a rare opportunity to hear from and engage with individuals who are transforming disciplines and shaping our world anew. Earlier this season, we heard fascinating presentations in philosophy and architecture. This afternoon, we're privileged to hear from Laurie Fendrich, an acclaimed abstract painter and professor emerita of fine arts at Hofstra University. We're prepared to be fascinated again, as well as informed and challenged. I do have another important task, thanking all of you for coming to this event, particularly today when the weather is so inclement. The strength of our university and our society depends on informed and thoughtful dialogue on the diverse questions that the Chancellor's Colloquium series is designed to address, those pertaining to the quality of our lives, to the health of our planet, and to the deeper strata of individuals, cultures, and our universe. This essential dialogue is at its best when it involves learned and creative individuals such as our guest today. Allow me now to introduce Jamie Fisher, a professor in the departments of German and Cinema and Digital Media and director of the UC Davis Humanities Institute. Professor Fisher will introduce Professor Fendrich, as well as our moderator for this colloquium, Professor Hearn Pardee. Jamie.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this conversation with Laurie Fendrich today. Our format this afternoon will begin with opening remarks by Professor Fendrich entitled The Downside of Art, followed by a discussion with Professor Hearn Pardee. Then the audience will be given an opportunity to ask their questions of Professor Fendrich. Allow me first to introduce our moderator, Hearn Pardee. Professor Pardee received his BA from Yale University and his MFA from Columbia University. He's been professor of art at UC Davis since 2000, and he's also taught as a visiting professor of art at the Yale NUS College in Singapore. Professor Pardee is a painter who has exhibited at the Bowery Gallery in New York City since 1980, and has shown more recently at Adler & Company in San Francisco, Alex Bolt Gallery in Sacramento, and the Wiegand Gallery in Belmont. He curated the 1996 exhibition Reinterpreting Landscape for the Mayer Museum of Art in Virginia, and has contributed essays and reviews to Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, and the Partisan Review, as well as in several anthologies. So, please stand. Thank you. I am now honored to introduce our distinguished speaker this afternoon, Laurie Fendrich. Professor Fendrich holds a BA in Political Science from Mount Holyoke College and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She is a professor emerita of fine arts at Hofstra University, where she has been on the faculty since 1989. In 2016, Professor Fendrich received a John Simon Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship in the Fine Arts. She's also received a painting fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and has been a Dora Maar Fellow at Malherbe, France. Professor Fendrich has had many solo exhibitions, including a 2010 20-year retrospective of her paintings and drawings at Scripps College in Claremont, California. Her most recent solo exhibition was at the Louis Stern Fine Arts in Los Angeles this past fall. Professor Fendrich is well known for being a writer as well as an artist, and her essays on the role of art in artists and society, cultural issues, and on the place of painting in higher education have appeared regularly in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Common Review, and in several anthologies. Thank you for being with us today, Professor Fendrich, and I turn the podium over to you.
So there's no hiding this. I'm here because of the miracles of modern medicine, because yesterday I had no voice. Today, thanks to a steroid shot in my bottom, yesterday I can speak. I've been assured it's that I'm not contagious. I am fine. except for this voice. But fortunately, I'm mic'd up. Thank you to Acting Chancellor Hexter for inviting me to participate in this year's Chancellor's Colloquium series. I really am not in pain, so even though it sounds bad, just go with it, okay? And thank you also to the audience for coming out, especially today. A lot of education experts malign lectures. They call them unfriendly to learning. They tell us we learn faster and retain more information from blended learning, flipped classrooms, MOOCs, blogs, any audience response system where you get to talk back while the lecturer is lecturing, things like clickers, anything back and forth tweets, anything but asking an audience to sit still for an extended period of time and do nothing but listen. Of course, no one sits and does nothing but listens during a lecture. We sit, we wiggle, we whisper little remarks to our friends, we think, we argue back with the lecturer, we get distracted, we return again to the lecturer's words, and most important, we let impressions of the lecturer bubble up and mix in with what the lecturer is saying. Content, rhetoric, and performance come bundled together in a lecture, which means that for all its artificiality, a lecture is excellent training for our real-life conversations. As for the person giving the lecture, me in this case, that bit about how nothing concentrates the mind like knowing you'll be hanged in a fortnight, it's true for lecturer as well. My lecture entitled The Downside of Art is deliberately provocatively titled. It foregrounds the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's brilliant, provocative, ferocious attack on the arts in his letter to D'Alembert on the theater, published in 1778. My goal here today is to show that Rousseau's ideas lead to a richer, more vigorous, and far more profound understanding of the way art and artists fit in society, for good and for bad, than what mostly goes on in current art world discussions focused on identity and institutional critique. My larger goal is to suggest, indirectly, that our political moment is ripe for a profound reconsideration of Rousseau's philosophy as a whole. That's your homework afterwards. My lecture is in 4 parts. First, a little about me and why I love Rousseau's letter. Then a little about Rousseau's life and philosophy. Then a synopsis of the letter, one I hope does justice to it, despite my omitting several important parts. And lastly, a conclusion, where I offer my painter's pushback response to his ideas. So let's see if I can do the PowerPoint. I forgot I have to type in my iCloud password. It's only 82 letters long, so just a moment. You get 10 tries. And then even FBI can't break in. There. Okay. I think I'm there, but maybe you don't think I'm there. Okay? Does it say the studio, home away from home? This is a picture of my home. Okay, so it's not my home. It's my studio. But that is home to a painter. I think I'm going to try the clicker deal. Did that work? So that's a picture of paint tubes and a random shelf of books from our house. You know, artists are said by the French to be really stupid. Painters are, in particular, are stupid. There's a phrase. But we do read. Anyway, the images here are meant to emphasize that I'm a painter, not a scholar. I don't come to you as an expert on Rousseau. I won't talk about Rousseau's place in the history of political thought or contextualize his thought by discussing the political situation in Geneva and France at the time he was writing. Instead, I'll talk about the letter, the way a painter approaches a painting, first and foremost, by letting it stand on its own. I first encountered Rousseau when I was a college freshman in a course in political philosophy where we studied The Social Contract. Later, after I had become a political philosophy major, I read his first and second discourses with a professor who was a Rousseau scholar. I was the student who proudly showed up, by the way, covered in paint, reeking of turpentine. No one wanted to get near me. But, I held my own. I didn't read the letter to D'Alembert until several years after I'd finished college. By then, I'd become a committed painter, and I had also read a lot more Rousseau, including his Reveries of a Solitary Walker, his Confessions, and the Emile. I'm not sure why I'm drawn to such a contrarian as Rousseau. It may be as simple as my painter's temperament admiring rebellion, or why, given that my sensibility inclines more toward classical restraint than nostalgic romanticism, I love reading a philosopher who pines for nature and proposes an idea about the natural state of man with which I thoroughly disagree. Or why, given that my feminism was molded by Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, for goodness sake, any of you old enough in the room to know that book knows what I'm talking about, why I didn't dismiss at first reading philosophy's most famous and truculent misogynist, or why, if I had to end up a painter with Jones for philosophy, I didn't just stick with Kant or Schiller. But no, I had to fall for Rousseau. And yes, also Plato. The two go very well together, and not merely because they share the conviction that art is inherently dangerous to a political order. They are very rare birds in philosophy, each a philosopher and artist rolled into one. I especially like Rousseau for the way he couches so much of his philosophy, his reasoning, his argumentation, in imaginative storytelling, salacious and humiliating self-revelations. If you want to really read something that beats Augustine, try Rousseau's Confessions, blissful reveries, and movingly passionate rhetoric. Here's a painting of Rousseau, a man who in his own time was recognized as one of the most famous of the many Enlightenment philosophers. The only one more famous was Voltaire. Born in 1712, Rousseau died in 1778, 1 year before the French Revolution. And here's the man he attacks in the letter. This is D'Alembert, born in 1717. He died in 1783. D'Alembert was another luminary in the French Enlightenment, and before Rousseau published his letter, the two were actually friends. Here's a portrait of Rousseau in an Armenian outfit, which he wore during the last decade plus of his life, which hints at his flamboyance and idiosyncratic ways. Some biographers argue, and there's a lot of evidence apparently, that he wore it at least in part as a way of handling his bladder problem. Rousseau belongs to the 18th century Enlightenment, yes, but because he argues against so many Enlightenment ideas, especially the idea of progress, he makes for an awkward fit. At first embraced by such other Enlightenment philosophers as D'Alembert, Voltaire, and David Hume, Rousseau's difficult personality, as well as his jarring philosophy, eventually resulted in all of them abandoning him. Voltaire ended up calling him, and I'm quoting the English translation, an enemy of mankind. Rousseau's philosophy in a nutshell, it's crazy because he wrote so much, but I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. Man is born good, but society makes him wicked. Man is born good, but society makes him wicked. This was not an original thought. From reading the brilliant historian Peter Brown, I know how vivid this idea was in the imagination of the ancient Romans, and I know also from studying with a Greek scholar on political philosophy, Tom Pangel, it was vividly alive in ancient Greeks as well. It was certainly alive in such early Christian thinkers as Ambrose. But because this idea went against Catholic dogma in Rousseau's time, it got Rousseau into a lot of trouble. Rousseau famously hypothesizes that human beings began as harmless, solitary creatures. Think orangutans, which he did like. He did like the orangutan. And only later in history, after they joined together into larger groups, did wickedness emerge. On his account, the arts and sciences that create advanced civilizations, such as ours, instead of being beacons that lead us out of the muck of primitivism, superstition, ignorance, prejudice, are the root cause of wickedness. Although he never disputes that civilization makes for material progress and cultural refinement, he thinks these things bring out, to a violent degree, the vices of vanity, pride, inauthenticity, selfishness, and greed. I'll use those words a lot for the rest of the lecture and mix them up in different ways. Material progress is real, but it comes with a price. The price is happiness. On Rousseau's account, natural ills and catastrophes, such as disease or violent or premature death, or even death itself, for that matter, are nothing compared to the psychological ills brought on by living in modern society. There, we end up divided between an inner, true self, from which we're alienated, and an outer, fake self, constructed according to how we think others see us. We'll take a swig of this vodka. Don't I wish? Before I go further, a few words about Rousseau's life. He has a fascinating life, and I could actually just do that, but I'm not going to. Born in 1728 in Geneva, at the time an independent Republican sort of city-state, Rousseau never attended school. He learned to read and write at an early age, and at 16 he left Geneva permanently. From then on, he spent most of his life in France, a lot of it in Paris. Frequently, he was on the run, compelled to flee by censors, like I mentioned before, who deemed his ideas a threat to the religious and political order of the day, or desperate to escape a disastrous social situation he himself had caused, usually with women. Rousseau was hugely famous in his own time, not only for his philosophy, which made him the darling of the French salon life, but also for his art. A successful music composer and novelist, his novel Julie, published in 1761, was a bestseller. Probably Goethe's Werther was a bigger bestseller, but that came later. This was the first big, popular bestseller. He was also an avid fan of opera, and he loved socializing with the witty and cultured elite in and outside of Paris. He also loved the opposite, retreating into solitude by taking walks in the woods or living in the countryside for long stretches of time. Rousseau's many contradictions, evident in both his life and philosophy, are legion. He even called himself a man of paradoxes. He was passionate about the theater, but railed against the way it corrupted people. He hated vanity, yet he longed for fame as much as Kim Kardashian. He enjoyed the company of women in the Parisian salons, but he argued the place of women is in the home. And then there's this. Half of you may get up and walk out. I don't know. Rousseau celebrates virtue, a word rarely used today. Rousseau's virtue evokes duty, overriding one's self-interest to do the right thing for one's community. Rousseau's virtue is within reach. His idea of virtue is that virtue is within reach of everyone, no matter how intelligent or how simple you are. I have to do a quick aside. He's talking about men, and he uses the words virtue to be talking about man's virtue. So it's a little tricky in lecturing, but I can't go into all the details. But yes, it's a lecture about manly virtue. But there is a female form of it, but it's a different word. Anyway, it takes hard work for virtue to come out. And it emerges only under certain very strict, severe conditions. Virtue, he argues, emerges only in small, strong communities, such as ancient Sparta or Geneva. Yet when it comes to virtue, Rousseau was a far cry from virtuous. By his own admission, he frequently told lies, really bad ones. His most egregious lack of virtue, however, rests in fathering 5 children by a barely literate woman who was first his mistress and then later his wife, and placing each of them one at a time in a foundling home, which, if you know anything about 18th century France, meant death. Rousseau's legacy is all over the place. For his ideas about the fundamental equality of man, he became the posthumous hero of French revolutionary radicals. For positing that man's nature is good, he's the source for every teenager who slams the door and screams out that you don't understand him. For his idea that property is theft, he gets the nod from Marxists. For his ideas about individual freedom, he inspires libertarians and even anarchists. For his emphasis on feelings over reason and his reveries on the restorative power of nature, he is rightfully called the father of Romanticism. And for artists, he's the origin of the notion of the artist as rebel, outside of society, whose role is to criticize society. Did this show up? Yeah. So there is one of the most famous sentences that goes with the name Rousseau. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. It's the famous opening line to the Social Contract, published in 1762, which is to say, civilization destroys freedom by enslaving us to false desires. The first discourse, his full title is A Discourse on the Moral Effects of the Arts and Sciences, was published in 1750, a fiery assault on the value of the arts and scientists. It foreshadows the letter to D'Alembert. Rousseau wrote it in response to an essay contest that had posed the question, has the restoration of the sciences and arts contributed to the purification of morals? Perversely, the committee awarded it first prize, and this is what catapulted Rousseau to fame. This is a picture of the cover of the edition of the letter to D'Alembert on the theater, used by most English readers, including me. Bloom's title, Politics and the Arts, makes explicit what's implicit in Rousseau, that art and politics are intertwined. This edition contains Bloom's translation along with his lapidary commentary. I put that together. I thought it was such a good phrase, but it sounds kind of pretentious when I said it out loud there. I just thought it was lapidary commentary. Go with me. My French isn't nearly good enough to read Rousseau in the original, but Bloom's attempt to make as literal a translation as possible helps anyone who wants to read Rousseau in English with the French by the side while you're reading it. In French, the title of Rousseau's letter includes the word spectacle. I can't really do it at all in laryngitis, not the narrow word théâtre. Most English translations use the word theater. English translators do this because all the examples in the letter concern theater. Yet by using the word spectacle in the title, Rousseau indicates his target is far broader than theater in the narrow sense. My French colleague at Hofstra worked with me to help me understand the French word spectacle and how it connotes the entire visual presentation of theater, from the decor and the costumes to the acting and the performance, everything. More, and this is really the important part, it connotes anything that's made to be seen or is intended as a source of visual attraction. It also connotes, and this is very important, a public viewing, something an entire community shares. In addition, the word shows up in French expressions that are about making oneself the center of attention, as in our English expression, to make a spectacle of oneself. Bloom argues, persuasively, that by using the word spectacle, Rousseau indicates from the start that he is going after all the visual arts and entertainments, and not merely theater in its narrower sense. Or put another way, theater sweep is so all-encompassing that Rousseau's attack on the theater is an attack on all the arts and entertainments. Philosophically speaking, then, the letter takes aim even at my little tiny harmless abstract painting. My noble aspirations for them, to the side, they end up as decorations over couches. And as decorations, they fall into the category of entertainment. The only exception Rousseau makes in his otherwise complete indictment of the arts is for small, amateur community-sponsored entertainments, which he lavishly praises for the preservation of healthy communities. Before writing the letter, Rousseau made a synopsis of Book 10 of Plato's Republic. That we know. It shows. Yet because he addresses new problems posed by the rise of large modern states based on commerce and money, like ours today, Rousseau's ideas pertain to our own times in a way Plato's don't. Rousseau wrote the letter in response to D'Alembert's 1757 entry on Geneva in the Encyclopedia, part of the huge Encyclopedia Vast Enlightenment Project. Many prominent Enlightenment figures, including Rousseau, contributed entries to it. Rousseau's response to D'Alembert's entry was to write an open letter, sort of like a pamphlet, very common practice at the time. At the time, Calvinist Geneva had a ban on theater, as well as sumptuary laws. Couldn't show off your wealth, in theory, making it a far different place from the lax French cities such as Paris and Lyon, where theater and ostentatiousness prevailed. Most of D'Alembert's article praises Geneva. It's very strategic for its overall conservatism, its hardworking, prosperous citizens, all that stuff. And then at the end, in this one little part, he tags on that wouldn't it be nice if Geneva lifted its ban on theater? For Geneva to become all it could be, prosperous, refined, self-governing, upright citizens, required the culture and the taste of Paris, required bringing it in via good, excellent Parisian drama. Now, quick aside, you might be interested. Voltaire at the time was exiled and living outside of Geneva, and a lot of people think Voltaire actually wrote this entry. And some people say Rousseau was furious at that part too. But that's not part of my thing. I just like the story. Good vodka. On the first page, Rousseau identifies himself as citizen of Geneva, contrasting himself with a sophisticated D'Alembert, whose several honorific titles he lists. The message is clear. He, Rousseau, is like any other ordinary citizen. He, Rousseau, is a man of the people, speaking to and for ordinary people. And he's up against a powerful intellectual who speaks only to and for elites. Rousseau begins with 3 premises. I'll let you just look at them instead of me reading them out. So those are his 3 premises that this thing starts out with. What interests me here with these premises is that in this section where he talks about this, he's an artist, yet it includes not one mention of artists. Perhaps this comes from knowing firsthand that the artistic drive, the drive to make art, is so powerful in so many people that artists don't need any defending or encouragement. In any event, his concern is strictly with the audience of non-artists and how art affects them. Later, Rousseau will go on to argue that whether a given work of art is good or bad, or tragic or comic, is entirely beside the point. What matters is what the audience gets. Throughout the letter, Rousseau uses the French word for which there's no direct equivalent in English. In French, the word means a combination of customs, manners, and morals. We sometimes translate it as mores, but that's not the full embodiment of what's meant in the French. Bloom employs the awkward construction I'm showing you here in the brackets, just the way you see it, which lets us decide for ourselves when we're reading what Rousseau means at that particular moment. Because sometimes it's clear he's talking about customs or manners. Sometimes you know he's talking about morals. But it would sound ridiculous in this lecture. So I'm choosing to simply use the word morals, even though I know in English, morals carries a whiff of priggishness to it that's not present in the French at all. So forgive me for that violation. In any event, Rousseau argues there are 3 forces at work in forming morals: the law, public opinion, and the appeal of pleasure. The problem for Rousseau is that the theater has no effect on any of these things. When it comes to law, okay, sure. You can imagine a law where you might be compelled to go to the theater. You're a student, there's a visiting artist who's lecturing on Rousseau and how art is dangerous. You have to go to the lecture, or you will flunk the course. Any students like that? No? Boy, I taught differently from the way you guys teach out here. But nobody can compel you to like what you see. To drive home his point, Rousseau recounts a story from Tacitus that I love, and I tell it all the time to people, that even after the tyrannical artist, Emperor Nero, ordered that anyone who fell asleep during one of his performances, because he fancied himself an artist, he was like a lute player or whatever, anyone who fell asleep would be put to death. Even so, people fell asleep. Anyway, I like to think of that when I think of those press releases that come from galleries which say, blah, 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 blah. This artist's work forces the viewer to blah, 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 blah. No, it does not force the viewer to do anything. Anyway, public opinion. For a play to be successful, Rousseau says all that matters is whether an audience likes it or doesn't like it. That's what counts. Whether it's good or whether good is rewarded and evil punished has nothing to do with it in terms of liking it or not liking it. And pleasure. He says the overriding effect of theater is simply make people want more of it. Even so, he argues, theater does affect morals. It can't make them, but it affects them. How? It intensifies those morals that are already present. From this, Rousseau concludes, because theater's effect is limited to intensifying and not changing the established morals, it seems to be good for the good and bad for the vicious. In other words, Rousseau says, if you're already a good person and you go to Laurie Fendrick's lecture, you'll be made even better. No, this is bad. If you're already a good person, you go to the theater, you'll be made even better. But if you're already a bad person, theater's going to make you even worse. Spoiler alert, he's going to do a U-turn on this at the end. Rousseau then turns to the actors themselves. This is the juicy part. It's fun to read. It's 137 pages. The English is pretty good. Bloom helps you through it if you have a problem in what, the important points are. Rousseau turns to the actors and he argues their talent at pretending to be who they aren't is not exactly making them the kind of people you should be admiring. What is the talent of the actor? The talent is to counterfeit himself, to appear to be different from who he really is. And then he says that second, again, to save my voice for the resounding finish. I'm going to let you just read it. If the talent of the deception of the actor could be confined to the stage, Rousseau says, there'd be no problem. But there is a problem, because this is impossible. Going to the theater makes the audience long to become like the actors, and they start imitating them. Surely, some people say, tragedy is different. Makes us better, right? Doesn't tragedy and art heighten our experience of the dimensions of life, develop our sense of pity and compassion, develop our empathy, and thereby make us better? Nope. The truth about tragedy isn't Aristotle's famous formulation that tragedy leads to pity through fear. It's that in giving our tears to these fictions, we have satisfied all the rights of humanity without having to give anything more of ourselves. In other words, theater deceives us into thinking that when we weep in the presence of wicked or terrible things that we see on the stage, it's the equivalent of an action, of doing something in life to fight wickedness. Vice or virtue, what is the difference provided the public is overawed by an impression of greatness? Whenever art succeeds, when it's great especially, its impact on audiences is such that any moral content it might have is irrelevant. Worse, says Rousseau, tragedy accustoms us to the thrill of watching actors, especially great actors, imitate bad people doing bad things. The greater the actor, the bigger the thrill. Yet aside from our emotions getting momentarily riled up, There's no takeaway. There's nothing we bring home and change our lives about. We don't decide, not to murder our mother or whatever because we see something bad. We don't do that. There's no lesson. Well, not quite. Tragedy in theater teaches that watching villains on the stage is a whole lot more interesting than watching good people on the stage because they're inevitably boring. Unless you get the backstory afterwards. Like, what's this? Dr. Huxtable turns out to have a backstory. But Cosby Show was pretty boring. And he was very virtuous on the stage. He was good at pretending. Anyway, virtue on the stage just doesn't work. Stoicism on the stage doesn't work in terms of attracting your empathy. To get the applause they long for, then, playwrights keep coming up with more and more wicked characters and more wicked plots. Wickedness no ordinary person could ever imagine on his own. The audience grows used to whatever the playwrights deliver. I guess I left on stage on that. So, what about comedy? Is comedy somehow better? It's no better than tragedy at making us moral, and maybe even worse. Why? Making fun of vices without celebrating virtue is to know only how to snuff out the lamp, but never put any oil in it. Which is to say, comedy is about destruction, not creation. And so long as it can get a laugh, comedy goes after any target, even a dignified or noble one. Now I'm getting to the juicy part of the letter that usually gets people in a little bit of a tizzy. In a part of the letter that causes enormous consternation for anyone outside the manosphere. I love that word. Those icky websites, those man websites where they have icky things about women. I've been a target of them, so I know about them. They're bad. You don't want to go, but I just told you, maybe you go home and look some up. Rousseau goes after the modern woman. He argues that by encouraging women to show off, theater destroys women's nature and ruins the natural relation of the sexes. Here's his argument. I can see there's no radical feminists in the room because in my era, in my day when we studied Rousseau, there are other sections like this, not just in the letter. There were women who would storm out of the seminar. I went to Mount Holyoke. They didn't put up with this stuff. Out. But anyway, you're very polite. Here's his argument. Rousseau knows full well our modern argument that men and women are by nature equal, and that patriarchal societies keep women down by giving men the power to impose their ideas about women on women. Ideas such as a woman should be modest or a woman's place is in the home are cultural constructs stemming from patriarchies. Rousseau argues this gets things backwards. Female modesty is rooted in natural biological instincts that were once useful to women's survival. Female modesty helped women fend off unwanted, aggressive males. Even when I'm modest, I don't find that necessarily works. But anyway, love, not female modesty, is the actual cultural construct. Love, which we moderns are convinced is natural, has nothing to do with our nature, our natural instincts. Even so, Rousseau says, cultural construct that it is, it's beautiful. What Rousseau calls a sweet invention made by women. An invention women invent an invention that comes only after societies are formed. It's women's way of keeping men, who would otherwise roam off in search of other women, by their sides. I love you more than I love anybody else. Even though you're 8 months pregnant, you know how attractive you are when you're 8 months pregnant. But love keeps the man by your side. The problem is, on Rousseau's account, by showing off, by indulging in the vanity that comes from competing for attention in society, women go against their natural modest nature. And by going against their naturally modest nature, they erode love. They erode and destroy that sweet invention And the result in modern society is that love is degraded from being a profound attachment into romantic frivolousness. Things are even worse with female actors, whose longing for success drives them to show off in the extreme. As for women who attend the theater, women who aren't actors but are in the audience, because they like being seen, they dress up and they show off almost as much as the women on the stage. Whenever I teach the, oh, I don't know what happened there. Is that good? Yeah. Whenever I teach the letter, I try to get discussions going by asking my students why it is that mostly it's women, not men, who wear lipstick. Or why there's a Victoria's Secret, but no Victor's Secret. Most of us here, I'd wager, remain convinced, despite all this, that women wearing lipstick or shopping at Victoria's Secret come almost completely from the way we bring up our little girls. If I had time, I do, quickly. I was a Skinnerian when I was raising my daughter. I was sure I could turn her into a nuclear physicist if I just didn't show her dolls. And I dressed her in overalls, and she never saw TV, and I cut her hair short, and I gave her blocks and trucks. And when she's 18 months old, barely able to talk, she was very articulate, though. We're going down the sidewalk, I'm pushing this stroller, and suddenly she yells out, "Stop." I said, "What?" She says, "Back up." I pull back the stroller, and there's a dusty hardware store display window with toilet paper and random stuff in it. Perched on top of the toilet paper is a dusty Barbie. I'm just putting that out there. At any rate, whatever anyone thinks, almost everyone agrees there are times when female vanity gets a little out of hand. But when it comes to vanity, women in the room, rest assured, Rousseau is an equal opportunity accuser. One of the worst corruptions of modern society on his account is the way men become as vain as women, thereby losing manliness. The only difference between the vanity of men and that of women is that vanity in women is unseemly and destructive to the family and love, whereas vanity in men turns them into fools. Here's a photo of Jeff Koons, my favorite contemporary artist. Not, it's just a joke. An artist who's turned acting the role of famous, successful contemporary artist into a mainstay of his artistic career. Some might say he's Ted Vane, I don't know. In a charming part of the letter, and I refused the tape. Is that back? Am I back in action? Okay. In a charming part of the letter, Rousseau talks about how theater has different effects on people living in small communities from the effects it has on people living in big cities. In small communities where the citizens know one another and practice direct self-rule, Rousseau sees citizens who are free and equal. Moreover, because their lives are so busy and they also like their lives, they're not alienated from their work, people in small communities have little time left over for viewing or making art. What time they do have, they use to make useful crafts, crafts uncorrupted by the influence of sophisticated taste. Rousseau's point is, having no taste is not a problem. We, with sophisticated taste, come along and sometimes we say we like that. But seeing sophisticated taste and not being able to handle it and applying it creates nothing but vulgarity. In small communities, there's no need for art. People like their lives. Big cities are different. In big cities, places where fine art is produced, people are alienated from their work, and there are lots of decadent people hanging around. Like Warhol, for example, pictured here with his wannabe superstars at his factory in Midtown Manhattan in the early 60s. For advanced forms of art and entertainment to thrive requires commerce and money, luxury, opulence, and inequality, things found only in big cities. The problem, Rousseau argues, is that the very same cities that produce art, that produce great art, at one and the same time produce great wickedness. And I have the quote. I'm not going to read it. But you can see he's pretty passionate with his rhetoric there. In some enlarged decadent cities, unlike healthy small communities, art and artists thrive, which turns out to be useful in keeping people preoccupied so they don't do even more wicked things than they're already doing. At this point, then, Rousseau reverses himself on his earlier stance. It isn't that theater reinforces already existing morals. That's not it at all. It's that theater destroys the morals of good people, but it has hardly any effect at all on the morals of bad people. Theater, it turns out in the end, has different effects on different audiences. So what does any of this have to do with me? What do this painter's little abstract paintings have to do with any of this? And what's my response to Rousseau? Well, first of all, I do still love him, but let me get the woman part out of the way. That I'm standing here should be proof enough that I reject the notion that a woman's place is in the home. That I'm showing off, I hope not too much, but enough to get your attention and entertain you, is evidence that I'm defying female modesty. I leave it to evolutionary psychologists to decide whether Rousseau's argument about female modesty holds water. But whatever their conclusion, notions of female modesty are in deep tension with the full expression of women's freedom and the possibility to achieve excellence outside the home in the world at large. I don't buy Rousseau's argument that human beings are by nature good and society corrupts them. I think Aristotle got it right. Human beings are social animals. Alas, they're also greedy. And a whole lot of problems stem from this dual nature. Nor do I buy Rousseau's argument that nature is beneficent. I've heard one too many baby bunnies screaming in the early morning hours when an owl gets it, red in tooth and claw. Nature isn't cruel, but it's sure blank, neutral, and indifferent. As for virtuous small communities, the internet destroyed the possibility for any more Genevas. Besides, I suspect most of Rousseau's Geneva existed in his imagination. Anyone who spent any time at all in a small, tight, virtuous community knows the oppression that comes with it. The spying eyes masquerading as neighborliness, the oppressive conformity, the crushing pain that comes with being the least bit different. Bad Day at Black Rock should be required viewing for anyone singing the virtues of small communities. You're looking at a picture of me in 2010, standing in the middle of my retrospective, a moment where my art was displayed in a beautiful museum, and I was experiencing inside a good dose of what Jane Austen called proper pride, along with several not so small doses of vanity, competitiveness, and ambition. But that's not all bad. Whoops. That's not all bad. It's truth. Artists can't be real artists, meaning artists who want to make the best art possible that has an impact on the world without having some artistic ambition. And as the movie All About Eve drives home, the ugliest and most naked ambition, so long as it doesn't land the artist in jail, has a real shot at advancing an artist's career. From reading Rousseau, I know art is never as autonomous as we artists feel it is when we're in our studios, or when we see art in a gallery or a museum. I see with a gimlet eye what's behind art's creation. I see behind art's creation, there lies wealth, luxury, inequality, and all the rest. For artists to forget this is self-delusion. For artists to dwell on it is incapacitation. Rousseau drove home to me that the only artists who make work for themselves, pace all those press releases, without some kind of audience somewhere in their mind, are outsider artists like Henry Darger in Chicago, or people in art therapy classes. Even people in art therapy classes sometimes have a little ambition that surprises me. So how do I refute Rousseau? It's not so easy unless I turn to art. I've taught this book to graduate students in the humanities for a couple of decades. I've taught it to freshmen, I've taught it to honor students, I've taught it to art students. I've never had a group yet where they solidly were able to level Rousseau. A lot of them said, well, I don't care. I still think what I think. But he's very difficult to refute in terms of argumentation. So where is he wrong, or what do I do? I turn to art. I refute him by turning to art. I start and I end by turning to art. No one knows, and probably never will know, who made these ancient cave drawings or why. But what with hunger, cold, and ferocious beasts lurking about, it's pretty safe to say they didn't have a lot of extra time on their hands. These sophisticated and elegant drawings offer a wordless refutation of the idea that great art requires the wealth and luxury found only in cities. Velázquez's Las Meninas, from a vastly different time, of course, offers yet another wordless refutation of Rousseau. This has been called the painting that sums up the meaning of all painting. Since no painter should let words get in the way of her brush, I'm going to finish by giving the last word in this lecture to this painting. If this painting could speak to Rousseau, I think it would say something like this. You're right, Jean-Jacques. You got the woman thing pretty right, but I don't care. I care a lot about the rest of it. Happy people living in small, tight communities don't get much out of me. I concede. I own up that I might make them feel their lives are small and I might not be good for them. I know I exist, at least in part, because of the pride, vanity, and ambition of a great king and a great artist. But look at me now, hundreds of years after my making. I offer you beauty, delight, color, mysterious light, and astonishing paint handling, a startling composition you'll forever puzzle over and never figure out, and a lovely, fragile little princess at my center. Look closely at that little princess. She was dead and gone by 21, brought down by an illness during her 7th pregnancy. That's what nature is really like. With me, she lives forever. So listen up. I'm here for anyone who feels the tedium, the sadness, the bitterness, the disappointment, the weariness, and the tragedy of life. I'm here not mindlessly reflecting or imitating nature, but talking back to it with love sometimes and with anger at others, both. I'm here for regular people like Laurie, who are compelled by history to live in corrupt times. Philosophers like you claim they're after truth, but we paintings are a lot more like you than you think. We both struggle as best we can to get at the meaning of existence. Thank you. Yeah. So deal with that.
Okay, if my microphone works, I can try and save your voice a little bit by trying to respond to so many complicated and interesting ideas and so many things to think about. I think in a way it was kind of appropriate the way you ended talking about paintings being silent and you talking for the painting, because one thing I thought about in relation to you and your work was just the whole history of artists who write about art. And I wonder how you see yourself in that. Do you think about predecessors of
Wow.
that combination of words, where some, I think the French, don't they say paint or paint, shut up. And
Yes.
and yet a number of French artists have been very eloquent at the same time.
Well, this almost of a whole thing. We could go just talking about that, but I don't see myself in a tradition of any sort. I do believe in clear thinking and clear writing, and so I'm inspired by what I call clear thinkers, and so I emulate clear writers, whether they're in art or someplace else. Writing doesn't come naturally to me, but neither does painting. I think that for painters who choose to write, there's some danger because painting is this wordless thing. If you think too much about it, you can cripple yourself. So I confine myself. I don't do art criticism. I confine myself to thinking about broader, bigger issues about art fitting into society and how it fits into different societies. So one of my hero authors is Margot, and we were talking about this at lunch today, is the Born Under Satire book. And there they trace in very vivid detail the changing role of artists in society. I think we have to be alert. I mean, that's one of the things I try to do in my own writing, that this is just a moment, a tiny little moment in history, and we get caught up in it as artists, but how we are today as artists is so different from what artists are going to be like in 50 years and what they were like 50 years ago. So I try to stay away from too much about now and just go for the bigger picture because I'm more interested in that. If I went for too much now, I don't think I'd do well.
I was interested, too, that as you say, you don't write art criticism. You've written a lot for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is not a place that a lot of artists write.
No.
And obviously, you're concerned about the role of education. So how do you see yourself in that context?
Well, first of all, I think the Chronicle was delighted to find me because they carried the idea that an artist couldn't write prose. So they said, wow, this one can write a paragraph. Let's go. And they gave me free rein to write anything I wanted. And so I went for things that I thought, in a funny way, my own students would like to read. And I always tried to write for them. So I remember, for example, I wrote an essay on Memling. My husband and I had gone to Bruges, and I loved Memling before we went. And then, of course, Bruges is Memling Center, right? And then the Frick had a reduced exhibition in size from the show that had been in Bruges. And I took my students to see the show. And the questions they asked me while we were looking at the paintings prompted me to write that essay, to kind of answer some of their more deeper questions that I felt I had failed to answer on the moment, on the spur of the moment. So that I think I do write a lot for my students. My most recent essay is about the destructiveness of critical thinking and teaching painting. I think that critical thinking, I'm not here to judge professions like English, but this whole stress on critical thinking. And by the way, whatever happened to just thinking? Why can't you just think? Why do you have to critically think? I'm still rebelling against that. But in painting, I've seen it. I mean, I've taught it since I took my retirement from Hofstra. I took an early retirement. I taught at Pratt for a year. And then last fall, my husband and I were visiting artists at SFAI in San Francisco here. So I got to really throw myself in with art students. And I felt really bad. I felt really bad for them because I felt what we were giving in our program at Hofstra, in a liberal arts program, which your students get here at UC Davis, was so much of a richer foundation because they weren't steeped in critical thinking in the studio classrooms. And they were getting a broad liberal arts education outside.
Yes, I was struck yesterday. Lori taught a workshop in drawing for some of our students, and I remember being impressed at the outset by how specific you were about what kind of paper they had to have, what kind of drawing tool they had to have, what kind of board they had to work on. It was starting from very material, basic, fundamental, simple things. And
Yeah, well, you're a great alum here, Wayne Thiebaud. I wrote in my essay on how critical thinking is destroying painting, I had conversations with him, I interviewed him, and I took a lot from him and put that into the essay. And he does also share, and many of us do, more likely to be old timers, that, there's this materiality to painting that if you let go of that and you don't treat that with respect. Now, look, this goes way beyond technique, but what it means is that there is a body of knowledge in painting. I go back to Leonardo, who tried desperately, actually is responsible for painting being taught here at UC Davis, because Leonardo's the one who made the argument. Painting belongs in the liberal arts. Before that, the idea that painting was up there with poetry and music and geometry was just a crazy idea. And he makes that argument, not in a coherent fashion. He has those notebooks where he rambles all over. But Martin Kemp, the Leonardo scholars, put it together for us. And we see the argument, how powerful it is. It is a body of knowledge. And to pretend it's not, to just say it's all subjectivity, is just a terrible thing to teach students. So there are actual perceptual, empirically verifiable aspects to painting that we have to hold on to when we teach it. And we can't go into, deconstructing it with freshmen, for God's sake. And it's really, I think, a crisis in education, frankly. But all old people say that. My apologies.
Well, one aspect of your painting, which you do write about in some of your essays, is your embrace of abstraction and your insistence on a certain very definite path you've taken in relation to this pursuit of abstraction. And I was just curious about your thoughts about how you made that commitment. And
Well, I think in a way, sorry, I don't know what that is.
the
Could be my
computer is
daughter.
talking. I don't
My
know.
computer's talking. Yeah, maybe I should slam it off. I don't know. I don't know why it's talking.
It's all right.
I think that, what was the question again?
About abstraction.
Oh, well, like a lot of abstract artists, I started off with a traditional thing, and I'm pretty good. I can make the doggy look like a doggy. I can teach figure drawing. I'm good at all this stuff, and I got really good. And a lot of us who got good, I'm not saying I was Picasso who could draw like Velázquez when he was 12, or draw like Raphael, I think is what he was famous for saying. And he could. I wasn't like that, but I was very talented. But, it just, in this age, it wasn't enough. It didn't make sense to me. And I think I was drawn to abstraction because I wanted to get away from, I'm a big reader, and I wanted to get away from stories. I just didn't want stories anymore.
Mhm. Well,
Can you take care of my laptop for me? I have no idea why it's doing that, but he knows my laptop. He can turn
I
it
guess
off.
the thing I was thinking was just that the way, in relation to Rousseau and the tradition of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, abstraction seems very much identified with that avant-garde, progressive aspect of art, as
Ye-
opposed to just the democratic thing of looking at images and everybody can understand.
Here's the thing. Abstraction starts off with a modernist utopian hope that it can be universal. And maybe when I was a very young artist, I sort of mildly thought that might be true, but I never bought that. I knew instinctively abstraction was this Western cultural thing. It had come out of Europe. It was this, it was that. I knew the confinement. It didn't bother me. I never thought of it as avant-garde. It was avant-garde to my mother, but I was, around people who were sophisticated. They didn't think it was avant-garde. Everybody was already, by the time I woke up as an artist, people were already doing pop art. Abstraction was academic. So my sticking with it had to do with a sensibility and a fatigue with realism.
Okay. Well, perhaps we should let other people ask questions. We have two microphones. There's one on each side, and people can just come up to the microphone if they want to ask a question, and we'll see. Let Lori rest her voice here while we're waiting. Any questions? Any fans of Rousseau? If you can come up to the microphone, I guess it would help if you could, if you don't mind putting yourself on stage, so to speak. There's a microphone over there. We don't want to be too theatrical, but
Come on, show off.
Well, I'm just wondering if, when you made that switch from figurative to abstraction, did it, what was sort of the timeline of that? Was it just like, I've had enough, I got to make a big jump here, because it'd be pretty hard to probably be doing both? And what was, how did you feel about the reception to your, or even if that mattered, and maybe it didn't, to your new work?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. Like I said, I'm like a lot of artists who are abstract artists. People think you can't draw and everything, but I can draw. And one of I had a long conversation once with Leo Steinberg, the art historian, who could draw in an academic way very well. There's a thrill, when you do a demonstration with students and you just can do it. You are performing and the adrenaline's running. And if you're good, there's this incredible vanity that drives it, which, because you really don't want to fail. But the thing about it is, there is this objective thing. It's not really, because it's a line, okay? It's a line you're drawing. Or if it's a painting, it's a flat surface. So we say it's objective, but it's not. It's crazy, the convention of the way we see. We say photographs are real looking. They're so preposterously flat looking to my eye. But there is this way that you get adulation. Your mother, your family at Thanksgiving, they'll all like it when you do figurative stuff. They want a portrait. It's wonderful and a pain in the nut. I mean, a pain in the butt. It's like satisfying, but it's revolting. So when I became an abstract painter, I narrowed my audience. I didn't become an abstract painter to do that, but I did find I was up against, there's no place else to go. The history of figurative painting was so enormous, and you're looking at Velázquez. I mean, you're staring at Velázquez. He's breathing over your shoulder. Abstraction's only 100 and whatever years old, 1910. I mean, to 2016, we're talking a century. So I still feel there's huge paths in abstraction. And I'm a synthesizer. I'm not an originator. I take stuff from Russian constructivism. I take stuff from Stuart Davis. I take stuff from George L.K. Morris. I take stuff from Seurat, and I put it together into an American soup. And so I pretty much know that that's what I do, but I'm not doing, and I also like comics. So it all comes together, and I kind of know that's what I'm doing, but I don't want to think about it too much. I want it to stay instinctive. But I like my paintings to be liked. But the corruption of the art world is that, like, you have a show. Okay, I had a show in LA this fall at a good gallery, a gallery I like, a very good gallery in LA, Louis Stern. And one of my best friends, I almost strangled him. He said, so how did it go? Did you sell any paintings? And it was, first of all, none of your business. But in a way, like, why are you asking me that? Am I supposed to measure the exhibition by sales? And artists have internalized that so much that we've internalized this way of measuring and evaluating our work by sales. And I think it is a problem. At the same time, if you're making art and you never sell any paintings, then you could ask a little bit about if you have any understanding of your audience. And certainly your dealer would want to wonder, do I have the right artist match with the right audience? So it's a tricky business. I'm with Dave Hickey on this. The market is an imperfect thing, but if you're an ambitious artist, it has to be a determining factor in your significance, in evaluating your significance. There aren't a lot of Van Goghs, like never sold a painting in his life or sold only one. It just doesn't work like that. So the switch, by the way, I still like to draw if I feel like it. I will draw from observation if I feel like it. It's not important to me, but as a teacher, I did it all the time, and I get pleasure out of it. But my work is different. I don't regret giving it up.
Okay, I think there's someone over there. Could you get to the microphone there? To lower it a little, maybe.
It's hard to talk to a podium.
I agree.
You've actually started answering my question a little bit, but well, first of all, I'm Mount Holyoke, class of '65.
Hey, I have laryngitis, so we could sing. We could sing.
My laryngitis is permanent at this point. So, but I am just interested in when you decide to do a painting or whatever you're creating, do you have it in your head ahead of time? Do you think in terms of particular colors or a particular way of constructing painting, or do you just go there and see what comes out?
That's a good question, because the answer would change and vary very much according to the artist. Certainly there's incredible art which is totally pre-planned. Mine, I'm much more improvisational than my paintings look. But a lot of how things work is sort of indirect. So for example, I'll give you a good example. Abstract painters don't use green very much, and probably because it's too associated with nature. But you don't see a lot of green abstract paintings. You see them, but not too many. But I went to the LA County Museum a couple of years ago, and there's this Picasso. It was not abstract. Picasso never painted abstract paintings, but it's abstracted, and it had green and white and a really dark blue. And that was in my head. So when I went back to my studio, I didn't think about imitating Picasso or something, but it came out in the first colors I laid out. My paintings start with a little sketch. I transfer the sketch on, I'm a good drawer. I transfer it onto my painting without a grid. I just do it. I know how to jump proportions. I get it up there. I lay it on. I paint from thin to thick. I paint from light to dark. I leave myself a lot of freedom, so if you paint from light to dark, you can switch things around as you're going. It's extremely improvisational. If I were to show you the first layout that came from a sketch and the final painting, you'd say, really? Even though they end up looking very certain, they go through these steps that are always changing. Like, oh gosh, I had no idea that pink would destroy that beautiful blue that I had next door. And so then it's like kind of chasing, around. It's similar to writing. Like if you alter a sentence, all of a sudden it doesn't work. It's the same thing with painting, especially with painting with color. I mean, all my paintings are about color, and color is relative, absolutely, which that sentence means that no color is capable of being alone. And standing and holding on to what it is. It's not self-contained, it's not autonomous. Whatever it's up against, including the light falling against it, the color next to it, whether there's a large amount next to it or a little bit, affects perception. This isn't subjective baloney, this is psychological perception, truth. So when you paint, every move you make over here has an impact of something down there. It's kind of like chaos theory. But in a way, like I've thought of this before, when you finish a painting, how did Velázquez know when he was done with Las Meninas? I mean, did he go and put a little dash of white on the tip of his nose at the end? Did he go and put one more frill on the little princess's dress? Did he go put one more piece of fur on the dog? How did he know? Because if you don't stop at the right point, you're going to paint a new painting. So you might say, oh, it's a lot more obvious in a figurative painting, but I don't think so. I think the existential crisis is in painting all the time.
Or maybe we should go over, we got to go someone on this side.
I want to thank you for coming and opening this conversation. I relish it. It's great to have the opportunity. And I hate to change the subject, because it's great to hear you talk about painting. But I want to ask something more kind of practical. I'm an artist. I'm an intuit by nature. No one would mistake me for an intellectual. None of my students or my colleagues or my contemporaries. But I've been teaching for a long time, and I actually read the paper about, leaving critical theory. And my question is about, I actually wrote myself a note. And you use the term greedy. It's one of my favorites, too. And that we're all like so greedy for information, and we're so greedy for tools. We're so, oh, sorry. I can holler. I don't actually need that. But, so now that this whole thing in education has changed so profoundly, like when I was a student, and all we want to do is feel it. And our teachers were actually teaching us like practical things, color theory, and so now that the whole kind of education has shifted to this kind of discussion, and I have to say that in some way it's useful because other people are using these tools and other people are using these ideas, and students graduate from programs with the ability to articulate certain things or resource certain ideas. So I'm just kind of wondering how you approach, how we would or just think about or talk about the shift in teaching back to a kind of very fundamental and leaving rhetoric kind of behind or changing it.
Well, I hope I understand your question, so I'll try my best to answer it. A lot of the educators in the room, I assume, are very familiar with the outcomes assessment movement. I made my reputation as the woman in higher education to hate when I wrote an essay on attacking outcomes assessment. I like to attack. Maybe that's why I like Rousseau. I feel the outcomes assessment movement has been horrific for education. Now, I understand, I don't want to go off into a whole avenue about outcomes assessment. Some people in the room might not know about it, but it's a universal thing now for any college and university to be accredited, to have to adhere to certain requirements that come down from basically accrediting organizations. And they're pretty much across the country similar. And what they did, I feel strongly, is they forced and created this prison in which we all have to now teach. And so although it may work, and I've had mathematicians who teach at my university and other places tell me, no, Lori, it's no better in math and engineering than it is in fine arts. But in fine arts, what outcomes assessment has done is turn us all into liars. Because we have to do these goals and assessments that are very clear and specific about what we're trying to do. So we make stuff up. And I'm sorry if the provost is here and you didn't know this. But we make it up. I mean, so I think what that did was it made us all happier to go to critical thinking language, because critical thinking language sounds so concrete. The irony is that if you parse it, if you examine it, if you diagram it, it's grammatically correct. But if you really say, well, what does this mean? What does this mean in a human, commonsensical way? People are hard put to explain a lot of it. So I think outcomes assessment created this critical thinking because it at least sounds concrete. That's why we feel like we have a shared universal language. But when people say all this stuff, I find it's turned into just a Tower of Babel of people just yammering and not hearing anything anymore.
I just want to say in response, I always say we're a visual medium. Outcomes, you can look at it, you can see it, and, it's not acceptable, but it is the truth.
Well, we have an awkward fit with universities, don't we? Because we're images and universities are about words. So if we want to be in here, I think we do have to use words. I'm just quarreling with the idea that the words have to sound so preposterous and pretentious and pontificating and abstract and theoretical and just, just come back to the ground, talk about what Las Meninas looks like. Talk about the meaning of it all, but you don't have to go, into paroxysms of Adorno school philosophy to get at it. I mean, he didn't paint it for a bunch of continental philosophers to dissect. He painted it for a rich, vain king. I think we can start there and get a lot more out of it.
I think we have a student over there. So.
Oh, I like students.
So my question kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about, but you talked about, well, I guess it's important to mention my background was I was an artist educator, and then I was developing arts programming in inner city schools in New York City for the past 10 years before coming here. And so we were bringing art into schools where funding was being cut for the arts in favor of test prep for K through 8th grade students. So for me, critical thinking was an important part of our programming, and we used arts to help children synthesize information by using art and working in different modalities to help sort of broaden their knowledge and experience, or like learn in a different way, more kinesthetically perhaps. So I'm curious to know, what exactly is your definition of critical thinking? Because it seems maybe different than what I think of when I think of critical thinking, and how you feel that is eroding art making.
Well, the simple definition is just critical thinking is thinking about the structure itself of whatever it is you're doing. There's actually whole websites on critical thinking that define it in much more detail. But it's a kind of self-consciousness about the endeavor. So, and I think that's the best and simplest way to say it. It's about a kind of self-consciousness. By the way, I'm not opposed to art education for little kids or something. I think that's great, but I don't think it has much to do with serious art. It's great, and it is important for little children to have art. It's important for them to have exercise. It's as important. I mean, I believe in public funding of public schools with everything. But I'm talking about bringing this intense self-consciousness into the medium of, into the classroom where painting's being taught, where you start to lose sight of what the painting looks like and structures and body of knowledge that is painting, which is like how to see and perceive the colors and what they're doing, for example. And I've seen too much where it just diverts immediately over to issues of identity or social critique. The painting sucks, but we're talking about the identity of the student, which is some combination of, I grew up in rural Texas in a half Latina, half Caucasian family, and tumbleweeds are in my dreams, and it's just gone off the rails because the painting is no good. And if you stop and say, well, that's not really coming across, they don't know what you're talking about because they don't have the language of painting. That's what I'm talking about. So I'm not opposed to identity art per se. I'm just saying cart before horse. Cart before horse. Now, well, I would just call that thinking. Yeah, thinking belongs in the painting classroom. for sure, and everything you just described has to go on. But I was, you know, critical thinking is a term that's out there that means something a little different from what you just described. I would just assert that. And I do believe in thinking, of course, and talking and teaching involves words. So, of course, you do everything you just said. It's very important. I completely agree. I just don't see the need to call it. I would say we have to go back for a minute. Everybody should go back to the drawing table, so to speak, and really start to think about, I mean, every mission statement of every university and every department now says, it's de rigueur. We teach critical thinking. I think people have forgotten what it means. I seriously mean this. I think they've completely lost sight of what it means, where it came from, what it means. Why can't they just say we teach people to think? You know, why do you have to think critically about the medium of painting when you're a freshman? Why aren't you thinking about painting? So we're getting, before I get
Right.
drowning in these words.
Maybe we should have one more question, and then is it Mike? Are you going to do it? Two more. Sorry, we got other people over there.
So I kind of want to backtrack on something you said in your presentation, dealing with the reasons we make art, I think, the drive behind it. And you somewhat delineated the one side of it is the only people who make art solely for themselves are those who need it for therapy or those who suffer from a mental illness like Henry Darger. And I feel like all of us who actually make art find that there is a broad spectrum of reasons behind it. And instead of having the black and white case behind it, I'm wondering if you could speak to the gray area of why we make art and the plurality of it. I think you can maybe try to quantify. We make art this much because we have to. We make art this much because we want to sell it. But there's a fluidity between the two at all times, I think, in our studio. So how do you actually, when you're teaching students who are trying to find out their reasons for making art, how do you cultivate that? And is it individually? Is it something that you think there's like a more universal formula for figuring out the basis why humans make art?
Boy, you ask a very tough, good question that maybe I can't answer fully. I agree with you. I think it's an important point, and it's probably a correction to an impression I gave that there's this range of forces or things that propel an artist forward. And that there are some, like in All About Eve, that's about an artist who's, all about ambition. And there are profound artists like Emily Dickinson, who is said to have been very not ambitious, but it's not true. She did try to get those poems out there. So there are subtle variations on this so we don't have to just say it's outsider art and art therapy or Jeff Koons. As for students, I think the most important thing I've always tried to cultivate is temperament. You got to figure out what your temperament is. It's a 19th century idea and it still pertains. Because you shouldn't be an expressionist throwing paint around if you're kind of an OCD person. Let the OCD come out in your art. I also do teach my students what I was talking about in this lecture. I ask them to think about their audience and go beyond just themselves, because we have a self-oriented culture, and if you wallow in yourself, your art will be very narrow. So I often try to tell them who are you making this for, and it could just be a couple of people in the class, or it could be for your family. But you have to think. I think the time has come to start thinking about the audience. One of the things I hinted at the opening of my lecture that I think Rousseau points to something going on in the contemporary world as a whole that has to do with art, namely propaganda, presentation, theatrical performance in the political realm. And Rousseau has a lot to say about that. If you understand what Rousseau was saying, I think, I'm not here to explicate him, I'm not a scholar, but I don't think it's oblique or hidden. certain audiences don't hear certain things. And if you think your audience is something and you think you're, appealing to that audience and you're missing your mark, that's a big miss. So artists are very vulnerable right now. I hear it all the time with young artists. They think they're affecting the world with their protest art. And it's kind of poignant because they're just preaching to the choir. It's an echo chamber. You have to understand your audience. So if you really want to affect change through art, you better really understand your audience. So I do tell my students to look at the audience. I hope that's answered your question, but it was a good point. It's more,
Okay.
well, you're absolutely right. It's more of a big mix in all of us. I think I have a fair amount of ambition, but I could kill myself that I got to this age and didn't get more ambitious. I should have been a little more hustle and, push myself forward a little more. It's too late, but you know what I mean? Like the one, your 20s slip away from you. You go, what happened? Where'd they go? You figure out when you're 30, oh, wow, I'm 30. But there's a whole decade where you didn't do anything important. Great people are people who seize their 20s.
Okay, well, let's have one more question. And Henry?
Yeah, happily you actually touched on this in your answer just recently with Rousseau and the theater, and especially something that really stuck with me, and I'm going to paraphrase because I can't write that fast. In giving our tears for the fiction, we have satisfied all the rights of humanity without giving anything, and kind of talking about inspiring pathos in theater. And that really rang true for me, and I was kind of wondering what your thoughts would be on the role of inspiring pathos in art, like visual art, like painting, and maybe on a larger forum, like maybe the public theater of our time, which would be social media. Do you feel like pathos sort of deactivates our motivation to do something more important or more powerful than simply, sigh to ourselves and, cry without doing anything approximately? Or
Well, you're at that core problem with Rousseau that I do wrestle with. And I'm not the best person to answer it because I make little abstract paintings. So they're decorations, really. For people with a sensitive eye who have a certain degree of art education, they have more meaning because they are referencing certain things that they will see right away. But I do think that the intention to create pathos will set an artist off on the wrong track. I think that pathos is an effect that comes when an artist's intention is somewhere else. I don't think you can aim for beauty and get beauty, or aim for, your aim as an artist has to be within the medium and it has to be narrower. And then it explodes into the reaction in the audience. But we think we can control the audience's reaction, and we can't all the time. The famous example is the really brilliant contemporary artist David Hammons, black artist who did the big billboard of Jesse Helms in Newark on the side of Jesse Jackson, sorry. Jesse Jackson on the side of the building in Newark as a white guy with these big words, "How you like me now?" And it was, of course, saying, if I were white, you would like me. And it was in a black community, and the black community did not want that billboard, and they protested it. And it was one time I think David Hammons made a kind of mistake. But see, that's what I'm talking about, understanding your audience. So I think aiming for pathos is the wrong way to go. I think, and I don't know if you said, well, that's what I really want. I want that effect. I think it's a very dangerous road for artists to go. I don't think that artists should try to control effects that way. I think they have to be alert to the wildness of the audience. Now, the one kind of artists that control effects and know how to do it are propagandists. And they're dangerous. So the more you know how to control the effects of an audience, the more dangerous you are.
Okay, well, that's a good place to stop, I think. With a warning to everybody.
Thank you.